In this video, we are going to begin the journey into JavaScript functions. And with that, we are going to begin with the basic function definition and syntax so that we make sure that we understand how to properly write and format our function definitions in JavaScript and talk about what functions do for us and how we can use them in our software development properly. So we're going to begin by creating a new file. And this is just going to be our demo.js file. And that gives us a clean JavaScript file to begin operating in, begin writing our code in. And let's start off with the syntax of a function. And once we get the syntax of a function in, we'll begin to talk about functions in detail and what we use them for in JavaScript. So the syntax of a function, there is the keyword function that we use first. So we just say function. And then in order to refer back to this function, in order to use it in our application repetitively, in other words, to allow other code to call this function in order for the function to do what it is supposed to and then provide a result, we need to give it a name. So we'll go ahead and name the function. And so we're just going to call this one something easy, and we're just going to create a simple function to start out with. And we are just going to call this one, say your name, right? And following the function name, you need to use some parens here. Now, these parens, we'll talk about what they're for a little bit later. Just know that after the function name, you need to have parens. And then the body of the function, or where the code is that will be executed for this function, it lives inside of curly braces. So this is called the body of the function, and it lives between these two curly braces. And they really just are the symbols that identify whatever is inside of it as the statements that will be executed that belong specifically to this function. It's the code that does what this function is supposed to do. And in here, we're just going to do something simple. And we're just going to do a console.log. We've been doing those when we began to learn about JavaScript variables. So we'll just do console.log. And then the name of this function is say your name has spoken. And we'll just go ahead and leave it at that with a semicolon to end our statement. And here, the body of our function really just has one statement in it that gets executed, and that statement simply prints to the console. Now, this function doesn't take anything in, nor does it send anything back to the caller. It simply does a console.log to our console, our JavaScript console. So let's go ahead and look at this syntax really quick. And let's identify each part of the syntax. Now here we have ourselves what we all know as a reserved word. So it's function. When the interpreter reads this, the interpreter runs into the word function, identifies that word, and this function says, all right, get ready, interpreter, go set up some memory for us, and let's begin to construct a function. So some repeatable code that does something for us. We already talked about the function name. This is how we uniquely identify the function in our code so that we can call it. The parens, they provide a place to send in data into our function, and we will see in a little while how we can send information into a function for use in the function body. We've got our opening and closing curly braces, and those just define the bounds of the function body. And then we have all of the statements inside of the function body that will be executed when the function is called. Now, to start out with, our functions actually don't get called. Nothing happens to a function until we actually call it. This is simply the function definition. We have defined it. So when the interpreter begins to read our JavaScript file from left to right, top to bottom, it will run into these lines of code right here, and it will like I said, the interpreter will read this function, say we're going to go set up a new memory space in order to hold everything that makes up our function. It's going to give us a name that will refer back to that memory space that will hold the code that makes up this function. And then it will add this function definition to our code base that is executing in the interpreter, and it will be ready to go. But nothing actually happens. It doesn't actually get executed yet. So if we were to actually go ahead and run this code, we would actually see, if I go ahead and say start with debugger, we'll see down here that nothing actually happens. We see all of our debugger information, but no execution, no code happens. To illustrate that, let's go ahead and do a console.log before the function. So this is before the function definition. And because this actually executes something, we should see this, and this is after the function definition. So when we rerun this code, we should actually see those two be executed right here and right here. But in between, we don't see this console.log. And that is because we have not executed this function yet. We are simply setting up this function for use later on in our program. So let's talk about what a function does for us. Now, if you've watched the previous screencasts on separation of concerns, the KISS principle, and the DRY principle, you should be able to begin to understand that functions are there primarily to provide us a way to solve issues when it comes to repetition in our code. In other words, they are a solution to help us apply the DRY principle, or the do not repeat yourself. And that is because we can wrap repetitive code inside of a function and then recall that function and have that code get executed each time we need it without writing that code multiple times in our program's execution. And so right here, we see that we've created that function. Now we need to go ahead and execute that function. To execute a function, and we're going to do it down here after this one so we can see how this thing executes, we simply use the function name, the parens, and then the semicolon. Here we've got our function definition, and here we are actually calling the function and asking it to execute. That's what putting the parens after it do. They say, hey, let's go ahead and execute the function that has this name. The JavaScript engine then goes back, looks for a function with this name, and then executes it. And by execution, I mean it runs every statement that's inside of the function body. And in this case, this console.log will run, and then we will have this say your name has spoken. Let's put a couple of periods after that. You'll see this particular say your name has spoken. It should print right after this is after the function definition because we have called it after the function definition. We have actually executed it using the parens. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Debug, start debugging. You can see we've got the first one. This is before the function definition. This is after the function definition. And then we have actually executed the function afterwards. And we can, as I said, because functions adhere or should adhere to the DRY principle, we can actually execute this particular function as many times as we want because it is repeatable code. It is code that we can call X number of times or N number of times in order to have it do what it does. Let's go ahead and do this. And you can see that we have just as many executions down here as we have requests for it to execute right here. So hopefully this really helps clear up, number one, the basic syntax for a function. We simply use the function keyword. We give it a name that describes what our function does. We have the parens, which provide the ability to pass data into the function. and also execute the function when we call it. The curly braces, which provide space for the body or the boundaries for the body, and then all of the statements that we need to execute inside of the function in order to accomplish some kind of a task. Now we are going to get into more specific forms of functions and become more complex as we learn about functions, but we're going to kind of keep it simple here with just a basic function definition. Now let's talk about what I mean by statements that are executed with the function, inside that function body. So here we can see when we executed the function right here, we can see down here that this console.log was run. And inside of a function body, we can actually have as many different statements. Of course, this is a statement terminated by the semicolon, as we learned when we learned about variables. We can have as many statements as we want that execute in order inside of our function body. So let's go ahead and let's demonstrate the order that these get executed. So let's just go ahead and say statement 1 executed. And then let's copy that and let's just override those really quick. Let's copy it. Put that one in. Oops, let's go back and just do that one. And now let's go ahead and change this to statement 2, 3, 4. And now instead of seeing this, we actually should see statements 1, 2, 3, 4. And we should see that 1, 2, 3. Let's make this simpler to count. And let's just say we should see it 3 times. So we should see these 4 statements executed 3 different times. So that means we should have 12 different statements executed in total, but they should all say statement 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it should repeat 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it should repeat 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's see if that actually works. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can see that we have a set of 1, 2, 3, 4 for each time the function was executed. And we can see also that each of the statements are executed in order, as we see that the 1, 2, 3, and 4 are still in order as they are inside of our statement body. What this shows you is that inside of a function, each of our statements are executed in order. All right, so that gives us the basic syntax of a JavaScript function. We understand that the statements within the function body are executed in order, and we understand that functions are used in order to help us stay in line with the dry principle by encapsulating repetitive code inside of a function that we can call over and over again and have it do something for us. And what we'll do is, in the next video when we talk about function arguments, we will talk about a little bit deeper in how functions help us with the dry principle.